Hello and welcome to this lecture, which is a conceptual walkthrough of Amazon Simple Storage Service, that is AWS S3 or S3. So as the name suggests, S3 is the storage service of AWS. Now, what kind of files we can store and upload on S3? These are going to be flat files like images, videos, etc. We cannot store database or an operating system on Amazon S3. All right. Another very important thing. The name of our S3 bucket, yes, it is called an S3 bucket, and even the symbol is like that. The name of an S3 bucket has to be unique globally across all the AWS accounts. To understand this, if we want to register google.com as or amazon.com as our domain, we cannot because it is already owned by somebody else. In the same way, if someone owns a particular S3 bucket name anywhere across the globe, there is no way that we can create an S3 bucket by that name. All right. Now, we have created an S3 bucket with a unique name, and now we have uploaded an object on that S3 bucket. By default, S3 service generates an HTTPS endpoint, okay, an HTTPS URL for this object, S3 object. And if we want to hit this HTTPS URL to access this object, we cannot, because by default it is private. Any S3 object uploaded is private by default. So the question is, how do we access it? We have to make it public. And there are multiple ways of doing it. One of the ways is we go to that individual object and change its setting to make it public. But at the same time, at S3 bucket level, we need to make another change. We need to uncheck a checkbox which is called block all public access. So if we do not do so at individual object level, it has become public, but the S3 bucket is still private. So we will still not be able to access that object. So we need to do these two settings it depends upon us which setting we want to do first, but both these have to be done for us to access an individual S3 object. All right. Now, something about bucket versioning, object versioning. It is possible for us to maintain different versions of the same S3 object. All we need to do is enable bucket versioning, that is a setting, configuration at S3 level, S3 bucket level. As and when we do that, and after that, if we upload 100 different versions of the same file, all these versions are going to stay intact on S3. All right. So suppose we have abc.txt and we have uploaded this file 100 times after enabling bucket versioning. All the 100 different versions will be intact on S3 unless we go and individually delete a specific version. All right. So that's about bucket versioning. Now, there is one more way of making our S3 objects public. So earlier what we were doing was we were individually making every object public at S3 bucket level. Yes, we have done uncheck block all public access, but this alone was not sufficient. We had to go to every single S3 object and then enable or say then we had to change the setting to make it public. There is another way. We can update the S3 bucket policy for public access. So If you remember, in our identity and access management section, towards the end, we briefly talked about resource-based policy. So there was one called identity-based policy, applied to users and rules, and then we had resource-based policy. So this is an example of resource-based policy where S3 is a resource, and this resource is defining as to who all can access its objects and this bucket and can do what. Exactly. This is S3 bucket policy for you. All right. Now, so if we do that, then the advantage is we do not have to go to each and every individual object and make them public. That's it. These two settings are more than enough. Uncheck block all public access at bucket level, and then at bucket policy level, to make all the objects public, we have to update the bucket policy for public access. That's it. And then we have all the objects as public. There is something else that we need to understand, a very important concept called S3 static website. And we will see that we will do continuous development of S3 static website as well towards the end of this course. So when we have enabled all these settings, that is uncheck block all public access, enable bucket versioning, and updated S3 bucket policy for public access, then we can enable one more setting called enable static website hosting. That will enable static website hosting implies we can actually add an index.html, and this S3 bucket will act as S3 static website endpoint. A static website endpoint will indeed be generated for us, and we can use this as a static website endpoint to access our website, to access index.html, right? Yeah, exactly. So we can upload index.html, and this generates S3 static website endpoint for us. So if we understand all these concepts, I think we are very well placed. And in the hands-on lab section, we will do each and every workflow that we have just tried to understand conceptually here to cement the understanding. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you in the next lecture.